So you didn't do anything to aid in her death, but you didn't do anything to stop her from dying.
I really did. I mean, I just watched it happen.
The man in this chilling interrogation footage you've just seen is 39-year-old Mark Jensen, whose seemingly happy marriage was rocked by a tragic incident that resulted in his 40-year-old wife, Julie Jensen's death on December 3, 1998. Initially, it was thought that Julie had taken her own life, leaving her family distraught, until a letter emerged from the grave.
You know, she contacts us a couple days before, and she leaves us this letter. Okay? Then all of a sudden, boom, she turns up dead.
A letter that shifted the investigation in an entirely new direction. What was the truth behind Julie's death? And how did a letter emerge from the grave? Hi, and welcome back to Mysterious 7. Today we delve into the disturbing case of Julie Jensen and attempt to separate truth from fiction in a story that still captivates the minds of true crime enthusiasts around the world. But first, if you still haven't subscribed to our channel, please hit the subscribe button and press the notification bell below. Let's dive into the mystery without any further ado. Tucked in the heart of the Chicago-Milwaukee corridor on the Lake Michigan coastline, Pleasant Prairie is a charming village located in Kenosha County, Wisconsin. One of the biggest draws of this place is its natural beauty, with several parks, nature preserves, and hiking trails available for residents and visitors to enjoy. The village has a thriving economy with several major businesses, including Amazon and Uline. Pleasant Prairie is home to the Pleasant Prairie Premium Outlets, which features over 90 high-end retail stores, making it a popular destination for shopping enthusiasts. With all these different features, Pleasant Prairie truly stands out as a special and desirable place to live. It booms in summer, but becomes desolate as winter settles. However, no one in this idyllic village of Wisconsin was quite prepared for what took place in early December of 1998. Julie Jensen was born as Julie Carol Griffin on February 26, 1958, to her parents Raymond Griffin and June Constance Hackert Griffin. Julie was the only daughter out of 6 children in the family. One of her brothers, Richard, passed away in 1957, just a year before Julie came into this world. But she got the privilege to grow up with her other 4 brothers, Larry, Michael, Paul, and Patrick. As the only girl of 5 siblings, Julie was the princess of the family, and her brothers were her protectors. Although a family of 7, Raymond's job at an automobile manufacturing company ensured that the Griffins were well provided for. On the other hand, Julie was a homemaker and dedicated all her time to her 5 children. As a part of her religious family, Julie and her siblings grew up attending regular church services and Sunday school classes, which further strengthened Julie's faith in God. Throughout her whole life, she always valued family and respected elders. Those who knew and loved Julie would say that she was a gentle, laid-back, sincere, and cheerful soul. Growing up, Julie changed schools around Kenosha County, but maintained the reputation of being an excellent student throughout middle and high school. Outside of her studies, she also sang in the church choir. Julie graduated high school in 1976 and went on to attend the University of Wisconsin-Parkside to pursue a degree in nursing. She also worked part-time in a Sears department store in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. She believed that her faith in God would lead her to a path that was chosen for her. Be it faith or fate, it did lead her to the man she thought she would spend her life with. In 1981, at the age of 23, while attending university, Julie established a romantic connection with Mark Jensen, a fellow student who was a year younger than her. Eventually, Mark graduated college with full credits and became a stockbroker, but Julie dropped out when she was just 1 semester short of obtaining her degree. She had no difficulties in her study, but due to the nature of her work, she had to closely monitor the patients, and it took a toll on her mind. She left upon realizing that the nursing field wasn't quite the right fit for her. However, she was excited for another new chapter in her life. In 1984, Mark and Julie took their vows and settled down in the Carroll Beach neighborhood of Pleasant Prairie. While Julie stayed at home, Mark went on to work in the finance industry and support the family. During the first few years of their marriage, they were on top of their game as a couple. In 1990, Mark and Julie's first child, David, was born. While Mark ensured their financial stability, Julie devoted herself to their son's well-being. Just a few years later, in 1995, Mark and Julie welcomed their second son, Douglas, into the world. Their sons were the light of their lives, and both Julie and Mark engaged in different activities, such as fishing, camping, and swimming, to spend time with their kids. The Jensens also got along well in the neighborhood, holding many get-togethers, barbecues, and pool parties at their home. Julie, who is known as an all-around friendly woman, enjoyed a women's book club with some of her neighborhood friends. But beneath it all, her priority lay in her responsibilities to her husband and 2 sons. By 1998, David was 8 years old and Douglas was 3. Julie had a part-time job with the Port Authority of Chicago, and Mark Jensen was the branch manager of the Stifel Nicholas office in Racine, Washington. Julie also worked as a volunteer at Southport Elementary School, where David was attending 3rd grade. From the outside, Mark and Julie Jensen had it all. They had a stable income, a nice house, a cozy boat, and 2 beautiful children with whom they went for several vacations. But no one could have foreseen the nightmare which would forever turn their lives upside down, followed by a letter that came from the dead. If you've come so far in the video, but you're wondering whether a letter emerging from the grave is too far-fetched, we assure you that it's worth staying around till the end to gain a deeper understanding of this fascinating topic. On the afternoon of December 3, 1998, Mark Jensen dialed 911 to report that his 40-year-old wife, Julie Jensen, was not breathing. Around 4:35 p.m., Sergeant Dan Riley and Officer Laura Hoffman of the Pleasant Prairie Police Department arrived at the Jensen house, located at 9020 Lakeshore Drive. Upon entering the house, they found Mark Jensen in the kitchen, visibly upset, trying to use his phone. When they asked where his wife was, he pointed down the hallway. At the end of the hallway, they entered the bedroom, only to find Julie lying in bed on her stomach with her face partially buried in a pillow. It was apparent that she was long gone, leading the officers to call backup to gather forensic evidence. However, the detectives could not find any obvious signs of her death. There were no stab wounds, no gunshot wounds, and no battery wounds around her body. During their search of the home, they couldn't find any suspicious items either. But she was a healthy 40-year-old woman, so it seemed unlikely that this was a natural death. While Julie's body was sent to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy, detectives started questioning Mark regarding the events that led to this tragedy.
But we need to find out what happened here.
Paul, I did not do anything to hurt her. There was a question between myself and the kid that morning whether or not to call an ambulance. Her breathing was funny. She could hardly get out of bed. I mean, it was a god-awful situation.
Mark told the investigators that Julie had been sick for the past 3 days and even vomited the day before. He said he'd been concerned for her health, but Julie did not want to see the doctor.
Here in her statement, Wednesday, December 3rd, Julie, they could hardly move. Here 9 p.m., told me that she was fine and she wanted to commit. And on Wednesday morning, Julie asked me not to call anyone, meaning not to call her help. She wanted to die. Right?
Yeah.
So on Wednesday
Wednesday
morning,
morning, she asked me not to call anybody.
she's pretty bad off. Wednesday
She
morning?
wasn't looking good. She couldn't. No motor control.
Should you call the rescue squad that Wednesday, you think? She was bad off enough to where she should have called the rescue squad, but she didn't want you to.
She didn't want me to. Well, right, I should have. In hindsight, I know that.
So you didn't do anything to aid in her death, but
I
you didn't do anything to stop her from dying.
really did. I mean, I just watched it happen.
When Mark sent his kids to school that day, he'd promised them that if Julie didn't feel better by the time they came back, he'd take her to the hospital. Sadly, the poor kids would not see their mother alive and well ever again. Mark claimed that when he returned home that afternoon after picking his sons up from school, his wife was laying in her bed, motionless. Julie's family was notified about the tragedy, and her 4 brothers were devastated at the news of her loss. Investigators were unsure about Julie's cause of death, and they hoped that reports from the autopsy could shed some light on the mystery. Unfortunately for them, the first autopsy report did not identify a cause of death. However, a toxicology report later showed that Julie died of ethylene glycol poisoning, most commonly used as antifreeze, a radiator fluid additive that prevents the coolant from freezing. Tests conducted on her blood, kidney, and stomach contents suggested that she'd received at least 2 dosages of ethylene glycol, with the final dose being administered just shortly before her death. Investigators at this point believed that Julie had taken her own life, but they knew they needed to be certain to crack this case, which led them to dig deeper into the lives of Mark and Julie Jensen. Soon, they discovered that things were not as they appeared on the surface. Rather, there were secrets hiding behind the facade of a loving and happy family. Detectives learned that the problems in the marriage of Mark and Julie began surfacing during the early 1990s, just after the birth of David. Just like many other women, following the tiring ordeal of childbirth, Julie fell into postpartum depression. Her condition was so frail that she had to seek therapy from psychotherapist Paul DeFazio. During therapy, DeFazio learned about Julie's troubled family history, which included her mother's lifelong depression and alcoholism, and her brother Patrick's attempt to take his own life at the mere age of 17. Julie also talked about how she did not like being a homemaker, how she felt she had to do all the extra work for the baby, and even shared her dark thoughts about taking her own life. She was put on antidepressants, and DeFazio expected everything would get back to normal. The tough phase of depression resulted in Julie's brief affair with a coworker, Perry Tarica. Tarica met Julie at the financial firm where both of them worked. He was also going through a rocky marriage at the time, and eventually the two formed a friendship. One weekend, Julie invited Tarica to her home for dinner, while Mark was out of town. Eventually, he ended up staying the weekend over at Julie's, and the pair ended up sleeping together. Although Tarica had a soft spot for Julie and would have liked to continue the relationship, Julie called off the relationship, cut off all ties with him, and even left her job. Julie moved on with her life, but could not get past the guilt. In 1991, shortly after the birth of David, Julie came clean to Mark, confessing her brief affair with Tarica. Though Mark agreed to forget about it, the incident put a permanent strain on their relationship. After this, Mark became paranoid and could not trust Julie. The situation deteriorated so badly that Julie filed for divorce in 1991, but did not go through with it in the end. The couple went to counseling together, and Julie withdrew the divorce. But the nuances in the Jensen household were yet to be finished. Explicit photos began to be sent to the Jensen home and to Mark's work on a regular basis. Julie also got frequent harassing calls from an anonymous source. Although no one knew who was playing these evil jokes, Mark had an intuition that Perry Tarica could have been the mind behind this all. Julie, on the other hand, was not sure about anything, and her emotional state was not ready to deal with all this. With the prolonged anonymous campaign of harassing phone calls and receiving photos that did not stop over the years, the Jensens involved the authorities around 1993. Officer Ronald Cosman of Pleasant Prairie Police Department was investigating the case, but could not come up with any suspect. He even tapped Julie's phone on 4 different occasions. Each time, the calls would stop, only to continue later as Julie tried to get back to her normal life. Perhaps to heal their dented relationship, Mark and Julie decided to conceive their second child in 1995, as children often bring people closer, but in the process of trying to repair their broken hearts, they grew further apart. Although in front of the outside world, they maintained the facade of a happy family and spent time together around their kids, it became clear that having a child was not the solution to their problems. While Mark submerged himself in work, Julie felt depressed, exhausted, and unappreciated, with her emotions spiraling out of control. The lack of trust between the couple did not make things easier for Julie. Her unstable marriage often reminded her of her unhappy childhood, and her biggest fear was ending up like her mother. So, despite juggling her overwhelming emotions, she stayed away from alcohol, and perhaps that further pushed her away from Mark. Julie confided to many of her friends that Mark wanted her to drink with them in the evenings and stay late at bars, something she was not at all eager to do. She preferred to stay at home for the sake of their kids. This history of turbulent marriage further hinted to investigators that Julie could have quite likely taken her own life. But in a shocking turn of events, even more bizarre stories surfaced, which ultimately changed the course of the investigation. Amidst this chaos in his own marriage, Mark became close to Kelly Labonte, a co-worker in the financial firm where Mark worked. Mark held a superior position at work over Kelly, who was almost a decade younger than him. Despite Mark being married to Julie and Kelly being engaged to someone else, the pair started an affair. In the months preceding Julie's death, Mark and Kelly exchanged countless flirtatious emails, all the while keeping it a secret from their spouses. The more Mark fancied being with Kelly, the more he saw Julie as a thorn in his side. Julie, on the other hand, noticed the change in Mark. Though the marriage was always troubled, in 1998, Julie felt it was changing for the worse. Though most of the friends of the Jensen family were unaware of their tumultuous relationship, she confided to some of her close friends from book club and one of her son's teachers that she was extremely fearful of Mark. She even speculated that Mark might have been plotting to kill her. When her friends suggested divorce, Julie told them that Mark would kill her before he divorced her. She also suggested that staying with Mark was best for their sons, so her friends did not intervene any further. Despite the danger she perceived, she still felt a sense of loyalty and obligation to her husband and his children. She was struggling to find a way to cope with the overwhelming feelings of depression, anxiety, and fear that were consuming her. As the situation worsened, Julie sought treatment from the Jensen family physician, Dr. Richard Borman. Borman noticed that she was in a miserable state and placed her on Paxil and Ambien, an antidepressant and a sleep medication, respectively. In the weeks prior to Julie Jensen's death, Mark told several people that Julie was depressed and was contemplating taking her own life and had lost a significant amount of weight. To investigators, these revelations were shocking. While they were busy digging up the truth about Mark and Julie's relationship, some more disturbing things were taking place. Mark might not have been the perfect husband for Julie, but her brothers were completely astonished when Mark did not honor Julie's wish, even in death. Julie had previously desired to be buried beside her deceased brother, Richard, but Mark went on to cremate her even without notifying the family. It was a big blow to them. And needless to say, after this, Mark's intentions were under scrutiny by her brothers. They couldn't help but feel he had something to do with their sister's murder. Mark, however, was not a man to back down. In fact, his behavior became even more strange during Julie's funeral. He allegedly showed no signs of grief and even laughed and cracked jokes. One of Julie's friends later commented that a stranger's death would have been mourned harder than Mark Jensen was mourning his wife's death. Neighbors also told police that just a week after Julie's funeral, they saw Mark disposing of what appeared to be Julie's belongings in the garbage dump. From all sides, fingers were pointing towards one man, Mark Jensen. But feelings were not proof that can be used in a court of law, and the evidence detectives gathered by interviewing numerous people and digging deeper into the relationship was merely circumstantial. The investigators found themselves grappling with the challenge of gathering concrete evidence, only to have a damning proof surface from a source they never would have anticipated. The evidence emerged in the form of a sealed package that was submitted to authorities by Julie's next-door neighbor and friends, Ted and Margaret Voigt. They told the investigators that just before her demise, Julie came to them and gave them the package for safekeeping, with the instructions that the package should only go to the police if something happened to her. They told police that she feared that her husband was trying to harm her. The envelope contained a letter signed by Julie and a photograph of a shopping list written on Mark's business planner. Surprisingly, the list mentioned drugs and syringes. But it was nothing compared to the content of the letter, which brought up the voice of the dead itself. Her words from the grave were so appalling that they had the power of providing the key piece of evidence to investigators. She went on to say that she would never take her own life because of her kids, as they meant everything to her. She also mentioned that she felt Mark had never truly forgiven her for the extramarital affair she had back in 1990. She ended the letter by acknowledging that her husband and kids were her greatest love, accomplishment, and wish, whom she addressed by her 3 Ds, David, Douglas, and their daddy. Comparing the known written samples of Julie, the handwriting experts determined that the letter indeed came from Julie. This was the rarest of rare occasions, when the deceased had predicted her own future, leaving behind clues as to who's responsible for the death. The letter would be known as Letter from the Grave and garnered national attention. But for the time being, detectives kept the knowledge of the letter hidden. Though the letter was incriminating enough, other evidence came to light. Searches of the Jensen family computer revealed some more incriminating evidence. In the days prior to Julie's death, there had been some disturbing web searches on the computer which included poisoning, botulism, and ethylene glycol. Detectives also found out that before her death, Julie had left voicemails with police officer Ron Cosman, who had investigated the harassing phone calls and photos during the 1990s. In those voicemails, she warned that if she died, Mark should be investigated. Unfortunately, Cosman was out of town at the time, and it was too late before he came back. Another forensic report also showed that Julie Jensen's death resulted from asphyxiation as well as poisoning. This was concluded after examining the bruises on her rib muscles, and crime scene photos showed a pillow over her head while her nose was unusually bent. Detectives believed that Mark was poisoning her over the course of a few days, but ended up suffocating her, realizing that the process was too slow. The first time investigators brought Mark Jensen to the police station for questioning was 5 months after Julie's passing, on April 21st, 1999. The interrogation started with the question of why Mark did not do anything to help his wife, even after knowing she was mentally unstable and bedridden. As the interrogation progressed, Detective Paul Ratzberg questioned Mark about the unusual position of Julie's body on their marital bed.
Are you up to looking at some pictures of her? I can grab them real quick. Okay. Show you where the position she was in there, and maybe you could explain it a little bit further.
I've got the image in my mind.
Okay. It'll take me just a minute though. Okay. Let me bring back in the photos and I'll show you. See, like here's a picture of Julie, and you can see here. Look at the nose, how it's bent, like it was pushed into the pillow, like somebody pushed it in there. I don't know how to explain that, Mark. You know, here's probably a better. I mean, that's almost looks like it's broken. Mm-hmm. I have Dr. Chambliss's report right here, which says it's basically an asphyxia death. She's suffocated. And the only way you can suffocate, Mark, is if you did something to her. A 41-year-old young female does just not stop breathing. You had to do something, Mark. Be honest with me. Be straight with me, Mark. Be a man. Tell me what happened here.
Nothing more than what I told you.
You didn't get on top of her?
No.
Well, the evidence suggests is that there was a pillow over her head. If you recall, you saw the nose, same as I did. I got pictures of it.
Right.
Okay? You saw the nose and put a pillow over her head.
No.
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 Mark, how did she stop breathing, Mark? Be straight with me. Be honest with me.
When I found her...
Mark, you had to do something.
I did not fall.
How can I
Honestly,
how can you explain this?
I don't know.
I don't know.
But no matter how much he tried to extract a confession from Mark, he kept denying all the allegations. To trigger Mark, he brought up the topic of his tainted marriage and his hidden girlfriend.
Well, let's get back here to Julie. I mean, here, we'll look at it where you're sitting from my position here, Mark. Okay? One, we have a marriage that was not good.
Right.
Okay, that was not good. You basically has a girlfriend at this point, the one that you were seeing before Julie. Okay? I've talked to some of Julie's friends, and they said she was divorced was mentioned, some of this other stuff. You guys were not having a good marriage, okay?
I never.
Without any other option, Ratsburg then revealed the letter.
You know, she contacts us a couple days before, and she leaves us this letter, okay? Then all of a sudden, boom, she turns up dead. You know, I'm not making this up. This is true evidence. And here we have Julie Jensen telling me that if she dies, you're the person that did it. If anything happens to me, he would be my first suspect. I know he's never forgiven me for the brief affair I had with that creep 7 years ago. I have been doing this 15 years, Mark, and I've never had anybody leave me a letter telling me that if they die, it's this person that killed me.
The letter dumbfounded Mark. But even then, he did not confess anything and insisted that he had nothing to do with his wife's murder. While Julie's family and friends thought that Mark was responsible for her death, Mark's family believed otherwise. His parents, Dan and Florence, believed the police had it all wrong. They implied that, as a trained nurse, Julie had all the knowledge about drugs and poisons. They also stated that Julie used the home computer to do research and then took the small amount of ethylene glycol herself, but never intended to die. They thought that she'd miscalculated the dose and died as a result. They believed Julie hatched a plan to try to make it look as if she was being poisoned by Mark, so that he would go to prison and she'd end up with the kids in the house. It was the only reason why, despite telling multiple people that she was in danger, Julie still stayed in the house. In his statement, Dan Jensen clearly mentioned that he believed Julie's letter was part of her plan. It was all part and parcel of several years of her framing and planning how she was going to do this. She needed witnesses besides the poisons. She made sure that she gave the letter to the next-door neighbor. She needed to establish people who would be witnesses on her behalf, Dan stated. Could it be true? Could Julie Jensen have done all of this just to frame her husband? Or had something more sinister transpired in that house? Nobody had an answer yet, but authorities seemed not to buy this story. In between numerous uncertainties, Mark Jensen certainly found himself under the magnifying glass of law enforcement, but detectives did not have enough physical evidence to file murder charges yet. Julie's letter was an eluding factor towards Mark's possible guilt, but it was inadmissible in a court because of the U.S. law that an accused must always hold the right to confront the accuser. In Mark's case, his accuser, Julie, was dead, leaving no way of cross-examination. As investigators dedicated themselves to the tiring work of finding significant proof to apprehend Mark, he seemed to be moving on with his life. Kelly Labonte separated from her then-husband and moved into the Jensen house. In May 2002, Mark and Kelly tied the knot and moved to Wisconsin with David and Douglas, where Mark started a successful construction business. Later in the same year, Kelly gave birth to Mark's son. But it was in the same year that prosecutors finally filed first-degree murder charges against Mark Jensen. On March 20th, 2002, then 42-year-old Mark was taken into custody, but the fight for inclusion of the letter and the voicemails in the trial was ongoing. Mark's defense, on the other hand, was trying their best to keep them away. The legal wrangling over evidence went on for several years, and after several pretrials, in 2007, Wisconsin Supreme Court finally ruled the letter admissible as evidence. The court determined that they had enough probable cause to believe Mark's right to confront Julie was forfeited because he most likely prevented the witness from testifying. Mark Jensen's trial started inside the Kenosha County Court on January 7, 2008, 9 years after Julie Jensen's tragic death. During the trial, Mark's defense attorney, Craig Albee, tried his best to paint a picture of Julie as an emotional, disturbed, and depressed woman who took her own life while framing her husband in the process due to revenge. He questioned Julie's motives while describing how Julie expressed her fears to everyone but did not leave Mark and did not secure her children's safety.
People who are depressed feel hopeless. It's a dark place. It's terrifying. It's frightening because there's no way out. And we'll come back to the letter many times, and you'll have to decide whether it's a blueprint for framing her husband.
The defense even brought up an instance where Julie told one of her neighbors not to get concerned if she was not seen outside around December 2, 1998, as she was expected to be put on medication. Albee also shed light on the fact that Mark was not the only one who used the Jensen family computer, and the disturbing web searches could have been Julie's deeds all along. Certainly, these arguments caught the jury's attention, but the prosecution had much more to say. The prosecutor and district attorney Robert Jambois described how Julie Jensen was a tormented wife and how Mark Jensen had both motive and opportunity to kill her.
She was sick, why she was ill, why she was suffering. As he lay next to her that night in the marital bed on the evening of December 3rd, 1998, as she was barely able to breathe, Mark Jensen lay there next to her, knowing what she was going through because he'd read all about it on the internet in the months preceding her death. Julie viewed herself as a loving mother and as a loving wife, and all she wanted was some attention from her husband. She wanted her husband to love her, and in fact, she even thought that he was trying to poison her.
To support their evidence, the prosecution presented witness after witness who testified that Julie was afraid of her husband. Most of those witnesses were Julie's neighbors and friends, but among one of those witnesses was Edward Klug, Mark's former co-worker, who took the stand with a bone-chilling testimony. Ed Klug told the judge that back in 1998, just weeks before Julie's death, in a bar he was having a conversation with Mark.
He started talking about different websites that he had been going to and talking about poisoning his wife.
It was a conversation that Klug kept hidden until the trial. The revelation was shocking, but Mark's defense tried to punch holes in his story, questioning why he did not come out with the truth before. Ed Klug simply answered that he was afraid of Mark. Whether his story was true or false, more surprises were to come in the courtroom. The prosecution also called two other witnesses to the stand, two inmates who served time with Mark in 2007. The first one to take the stand was David Thompson, who was behind bars for robbery charges. Thompson claimed that Mark was hatching a plan to make Edward Klug disappear from the face of the earth.
He said Mr. Klug would ultimately be the one that would bring him down to get him locked up in prison. And he wished that he would just go away.
And what did you do in order to accomplish that objective?
I told him that I could possibly make it happen for him.
David claimed that he agreed to do this job to kidnap Klug in exchange for money, though he never had any intention to carry out the plan. Shockingly, Thompson even made a call to Kelly asking for money, though the actual plan was never mentioned in it.
You got an offer of help today in a different way, which was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It might have you give them some money. Just a little bit.
How much?
It'd be like 500. Maybe twice. And that would be it.
The second in the line for jailhouse snitches was a convicted felon, Aaron Dillard. He testified that, during incarceration, Mark Jensen confessed to him that he poisoned his wife and described to him in graphic detail how he suffocated her to death. Although Mark's defense was accusing both of the inmates of lying for their own benefits, the jury did not seem to buy Mark's story. Additionally, Dillard's testimony matched the medical examiner's findings that Julie died of asphyxia along with poisoning. After all the evidence and witness testimonies were presented, Craig Albee, in his closing statement, reclaimed that Mark Jensen was indeed innocent and had no participation in his wife's death. Julie did that to herself, falling prey to her unstable mind. Prosecutor Robert Jambois, on the other hand, accused Mark of intentionally murdering his wife and watching her die. On February 21, 2008, after days of deliberation, the jury announced the guilty verdict. Minutes after the verdict was read, Prosecutor Jambois expressed his thoughts. Mark Jensen is one of the most cold-blooded people I've ever seen in my life. To lay next to his wife at night as she's gasping for breath, gasping to live, but trying to live as he then listens to her, waiting for her to die. On February 27, 2008, Mark Jensen returned to court for his sentencing. His sons, David and Douglas, who believed their father's innocence the whole time, pleaded for leniency. Julie's brother, Paul Griffin, however, requested the judge to show no mercy over his sister's murderer.
The court today to show no mercy for Mark Jensen. Why, you might ask? Because he showed no mercy to his wife, my sister, Julie Jensen.
Before sentencing, the judge passed some harsh comments to Mark Jensen. Eventually, he was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. To Julie's loved ones, justice was served against all the suffering she went through throughout her life, and even in the last moments of her life. However, the saga wasn't over yet. After years of appeals, Mark Jensen won a new trial because the Supreme Court of Wisconsin decided that Julie's letter should not have been allowed into the trial because it violated Jensen's Sixth Amendment rights. On January 9, 2023, Mark's second trial began without the letter this time. The prosecution focused on other evidence that proved his culpability, including the disturbing internet searches. But on February 1, 2023, following a day of deliberations, the jury found him guilty again. Despite his tearful pleas for parole eligibility, now 63-year-old Mark Jensen was sentenced to life without parole once again, hopefully ending the ordeal once and for all. Whatever the truth holds, the lives of their two sons were forever destroyed as a result of this devastating event. Losing a parent to violence is an unfathomable experience, but to have it at the hands of the other parent is a whole other level of trauma. The boys not only had to deal with the loss of their mother, but also the fact that their father was responsible for her death. This would have undoubtedly caused emotional turmoil. It's heartbreaking to think that the actions of one individual could cause such destruction to a family. Do you think Mark Jensen really killed his wife? Or was Julie responsible for her own death? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more bone-chilling true stories.